class. Today I am starting to record videos inside for the first time, so that should give us a little bit of relief from all the environmental noises that we've been getting used to. And so let's get started. First, what we're doing is we're looking at a chapter from Manuel Velasquez in terms of how it is that we're understanding innate ideas. And so when we're understanding something as innate, we're also seeing it as something that comes naturally to us, for instance. And in this case, we're also looking at that which is innate in terms of reason. So in the context of how it is that we're understanding how it is that we are rational, and also starting out with Plato and Socrates by looking at the dialogue Meno. And so when we're understanding that which is innate, we are understanding our innate capacity for reason. So such things as a certain point or a line or that which is straight or something that is equal, or the idea that every event has a cause, a shortest distance between any 2 points is a straight line, etc., are all ways in which we are understanding things reasonably. And as I always talk about in classes, other ways that we understand reasoning also encapsulate how it is that we are understanding and organizing the world around us. So reason is inherently organizational and also structural, and how it is that we're understanding laws and guidelines, principles, so on and so forth. So in Plato's Meno, we have the illustration that, or the dialogue in which Socrates is talking to a young man about how it is that we're understanding innate ideas. And so for Plato and Socrates, we are also recognizing that they believed that before we were born, we all took part in a way in which reasoning is a part of our distant past. Or in other words, when we're using reasoning, we're recollecting from the time before we were born in which we participated in the larger order of the universe, or the logos, so to speak. So it has a spiritual element and also a secular element, and likewise geometric, mathematical, and scientific features as well. Because we also need to remember that for the ancient Greeks, the way in which we were understanding, or the way in which we understand math and science, go hand in hand with our philosophical investigations as well. And so in the dialogue, in Plato's dialogue Meno, we have the example otherwise known as doubling the square. And I went ahead and printed out some quick diagrams here that are in our text. And so the story goes that when Socrates was trying to demonstrate to the young man the importance and significance and relevance of innate reasoning, he did so by way of a geometric example. And so in the first case, I believe the story goes that Socrates drew up this square in the sand and asked the young man to double the square geometrically. And that's where we have the second example right here. And so the second example, when we look at it and work to understand it geometrically, we see that actually the young boy got it wrong, and it's actually quadruple the size. So he did not, in fact, double the square, he quadrupled the size of the square. And so we could see that quadrupling right right here in our example from the textbook. And so Socrates basically explained to him, no, this is not correct. This is quadruple the size of what it needs to be. It's not, in fact, double the size as we were wanting to recognize. And so we have the second example where Socrates basically takes the same square, as we could see right here, the red and blue square, and drew a diagonal from one end to the other here, and showed the young man that this square here in yellow is actually double the size. And when you take the triangles and cut them out to fill in this yellow square in terms of two squares equaling this size, they are actually literally double that size. And so as Socrates explained this to the young man, he also had a moment, or the young man had a moment where he was able to recognize that this was in fact correct. And so the way to think about it is that he had an aha moment. In other words, he was able to recognize that his first example was incorrect and that what Socrates was showing him here was more accurate. And in that way, that aha moment is there to signify the importance of how it is that we recollect our innate capacity by way of the term anamnesis. And so anamnesis has to do with this idea of recollecting something from the distant past. And in this case, when we are keying into our reasoning capacity, we are keying into our anamnesis in the sense that we use our reasoning or our potential to reason in order to understand things mathematically, geometrically, scientifically, so on and so forth, and more specifically, principles and ideas. And so the one thing to think there is that we always identify how it is that we are reasonable, and when we are recognizing that we are reasonable, we also need to understand that that reason is not something that we are just born with the capacity to do to utilize in an excellent way. So in other words, that's the process of becoming educated. So in other words, when we are educated, we are then making use or hoping to make use of our reasoning in a way that is in accordance with guidelines, principles, structures of thinking that is shared. So it's shared and it's also part of the larger order of things, or the logos of the universe, and likewise the logos of how it is that we are all understanding reason as well. So it's not just something that I do by myself, it's also something that I share. And so for the ancients, the word logos not only represents the way in which we're understanding things in terms of logic, but also the way in which we're understanding things by way of logic. So, by way of language. So in other words, logos also meant language. And another thing too that I often forget to point out to students as well is if we're understanding reason as structural and having to do with principles and guidelines, that sort of thing, not only are we understanding things mathematically in that way and scientifically, but we are also simultaneously understanding things architecturally. So in other words, our engagement with architecture is also inherently rational. And that's an important point, and also keying into this term anamnesis for Plato and Socrates. So we jump ahead to the 17th century with the German philosopher Gottfried Leibniz. He was born in 1646 and dies in 1716, and he is known as a rationalist. And also, too, he was interested in the way in which we're understanding innate ideas, but more so in light of what we would call tendencies. So in other words, ideas or rational ideas are not fully formed in our minds at birth. Rather, they are tendencies or dispositions. So, for example, when you refer to the PDF that I've included in our announcement, you could also see this picture of blocks of marble. So in other words, when we have blocks of marble, it is something that the sculptor can then recognize as a way in which he or she could sculpt a bust of Hercules. So in other words, the sculptor has to recognize the capacity or the tendency of the stone to take on specialized cuts that the sculptor chisels into the stone in order to sculpt the bust of Hercules. And so, in other words, the marble takes the cuts of the sculptor who utilizes the natural tendencies of the marble. Another way also to understand this is in light of that which is potential. So in other words, when Leibniz is using the word tendency, we could also see the word potential as a way to understand this in terms of something that we are born with. In other words, we are born with the potential to reason, and as we become educated, we also use those skills to the best of our abilities. So this also keys into the another Greek philosopher, Aristotle, who also in his work on metaphysics keys into how it is that we understand things metaphysically in terms of that which is actual and then likewise that which is potential. So when we're understanding potentiality, one thing that we don't always recognize there is that that which is potential is brought out of that which is actual. So in other words, actuality also is a way in which we're understanding something as potential. So in other words, potentiality and actuality go hand in hand, and that also is a way in which we could better understand what it is that the rationalist Leibniz was pointing out. So staying with Velasquez's chapter on innate ideas, he also introduces us to one of the oldest religions of the world, known as Jainism. And so Jainism is also a religion that the great Mahatma Gandhi was. So Mahatma Gandhi was a Jain, and the Jains believed that we hold complete knowledge of everything in the universe, not limited to time and space, but present everywhere. But yet our unethical actions of the past obscure our capacity for a view of complete knowledge. So in other words, when we aim to free ourselves of immorality and delusion, so on and so forth, this is a way to release our bondage from material things in order to recognize the larger order of the universe. And when we are doing this, we are taking a vow of ahimsa. So, in other words, that's why the Jains were vegan and also notable for practicing nonviolence. So, in other words, if we remember the story of Mahatma Gandhi in relation to Martin Luther King Jr., we could recognize that Martin Luther King Jr. was inspired by Mahatma Gandhi in terms of the civil rights struggle in order to bring about non-violence in order to drive forward through the civil rights struggle. And so that's notable in what Martin Luther King was aiming for. In other words, not practicing violence in order to step forward with civil rights, was inspired by Mahatma Gandhi and, by extension, the Jains. So, in other words, the Jains were getting away from the animal urge to be selfish and then to recognize a transcendence of violence in the name of self-interest by taking this vow of ahimsa, and then to recognize the whole as a logical recognition that we are all part of the larger order of things in terms of complete knowledge. And yes, to take care of yourself is where this all begins, and to harm someone else is wrong. And so this is the way in which we're recognizing how it is that we are interlocked with the larger order of things by way of taking a vow of ahimsa. And this is also metaphysical in the sense that we are then recognizing that we are a part of the larger whole, and a way to recognize part of the larger whole is also a feature of how it is that we're understanding things rationally, and then likewise metaphysically. Because when we're understanding things metaphysically, we're also recognizing that which is real in terms of reality, but then also that which is reasonable and logical as well. And so this is all a part of how it is that we are also recognizing our ethical relationship to the larger whole in terms of how it is that we as individuals take part in it. So I'll go ahead and pause here and we'll take it from there.